If you're like me and you enjoy storytelling, you probably also enjoy seeing it get analyzed. No matter what the piece of fiction is, it can aid to further your own understanding of stories in general. And stories are great, because they make us feel emotions and feel alive, but they also sometimes don't. This one happens to be from a series of games I care about, and sometimes happens to have great stories. And I want to talk about why the story of this particular game did not make me feel much emotion. If you're unfamiliar with the Megaman games, the lore before Megaman ZX is that an evil gets defeated and robots and humans can now live in peace together. It's more complicated in the details, but that's seriously all you need to know. The intro scene starts off with expository dialogue from two delivery men about their parcel, and then some exposition about a company named Slither Inc. that saved the city the story takes place in from a power shortage, and you're now becoming aware how much exposition I'm telling you, and boom, the red guy's probably dead. Not much room for characterization. Our protagonist, the delivery man Vent, gets blasted and thrown literally into the right place and time with the package landing next to the delivery customer. That option would be nice on Amazon. The enemy robots of this game are ones that have gone haywire from Slither Inc. and attack civilians, which is what is happening in this case, suspiciously around the delivery parcel. The delivery client refuses to run because she can't let the package fall into the wrong hands, so instead of letting it fall into hers and running, she just stays there, prompting our civilian delivery man Vent to find some way to protect her from the gigantic snake robot. Luckily, the package actually turns out to be a superpower granting device called a biometal that picks its user, making them quote-unquote chosen ones. This biometal grants Vent its power, thus rescuing them and allowing Vent to fight off the attack. That's the scene. Now, here's my analysis. As far as the call of action goes for our hero, this one is really contrived. I'll state what the sequence fails to do in order. Firstly, we don't know why the protagonist is the protagonist. It's commonplace in stories to give us a reason to root for our lead character. Vent simply happens to be lucky. He isn't equipped to deal with the threat of the snake, and he doesn't do much aside from standing around. The real hero in this sequence is Model X, who grants its power to Vent, luckily right in time before Vent has to make a choice himself on what to do. Secondly, the dire situation doesn't seem believable. Vent should just take Model X, help Prairie to run, and then escape. Being a meat shield for her would delay the inevitable, but actively helping her up to flee and taking the biometal too would show some heroism, even if they get caught inevitably. Take a look at this dialogue with what I've said in mind. Does that seem true? His first reaction to an escape with Model X and Prairie was just to shoot the idea down. Writers need to show that their dialogue is true. Otherwise, the words don't really have any meaning behind them. If they did at least attempt to flee and then get caught, at least then Vent has something to show for the brave trait Model X apparently sees in him. Thinking about alternate scenarios that can happen in a story can help you to understand what may be wrong with the original writing. The takeaway is this: if you only exert minimal effort in your storytelling, then you only get in return minimal emotion from the player. Dialogue-driven build-up is the bare minimum. Vent saying he wants to do something, and Model X saying he acted brave, doesn't exist when you take away the words. That's how you could analyze how good any dialogue is. Now let's get to the next set of scenes with the intro out of the way. The client of the parcel delivery belongs to a group called the Guardians, who are content with Vent keeping the biometal because he is the chosen one, so might as well induct him into the group too. He has to do some missions though before he's allowed into the base. Light work. Vent finds some leftover data chips that suggest Slither Inc., the company mentioned previously that saved the city years ago, is actually controlling the Maverick outbreaks. If you haven't caught that word yet, it's the one they use for the haywire robots. He runs into the red guy and the biometal situation happened to him too. He was saved by Model Z. He tells us more expository dialogue about how he knew about the biometals in the package and he couldn't tell Vent because he was told it was dangerous, and you're becoming more aware of the exposition and lack of character, and oh, there he goes again. They let Vent onto the base after finding the data and finding the red guy, and there's a cool reveal about how it's an airship base in the sky. Take that in. We never use it. Prairie tells Vent more about herself, specifically that she's actually the commander of the Guardians and that the biometals were found in a lab that belonged to her sister. Not biological sister, but just a nickname. The biometals are actually fragments of legendary heroes who saved the world very long ago. And this is actually a pretty cool way of passing down the title of Megaman from previous game series to the present of this game. Suddenly, Mavericks raid the residential area and we have to do something about it because Slither Inc.'s security patrol won't reach them in time. It turns out it's a trap and the head of Slither Inc. in classic villain style mind controls the red guy and you have to kill him. What an intimidating Giga Chad. He doesn't even bother to hide his entire plan from Vent, just lets it air out. This is how CEOs actually speak, so the writers at least got that right. After they take important passwords from Vent and the red guy's biometals, the trio of Saturday morning cartoon villains leave, and the red guy dies in the process of de-transforming to pass his biometal onto Vent so he has a chance. Vent wants power to save the people, so he accepts it, transforms, and can't do anything about the bad guys getting away. Now, for some more analysis. Ultimately, up until this part of the game's story, there's something major that the story is actually lacking. We don't know who Vent is fighting for. His mother died in a Maverick raid and he wants to prevent the same from happening to others, so we do have a motivation, but we're never shown who the vague people he talks about wanting to protect actually are. Look at this dialogue. It's the same issue as the other line where he says he had to try to save the girl. Take away the dialogue and we have no idea who he's fighting for. Is it the Guardians? They're already fighting for the general public. Maybe you'd think he would mean the general public too then, right? But Vent doesn't actually know anybody in the city, since it's his first time here in at least 10 years according to the intro dialogue. The red guy has to tell him to hide his feelings about the incident that happened exactly 10 years ago while he's in the city. So he's clearly not been there for at least that long, and at most maybe never been there at all. Matter of fact, there's a mission where we have to explore the city to play hide and seek, and it only requires us to speak with the hiding guardians. Why not use that opportunity to canonically have Vent speak to civilians and get to know who he's fighting to protect? Give him a scene here where he makes a friend or two, or show that he knows people here. Imagine how great that cutscene dialogue would be if the stage showed Vent actually save city folk from the Mavericks. We do save them from a fire later in the game, why not do something similar here? But once that level comes around, it's too late to pack any punch to this dialogue. Once again, by coming up with hypothetical scenarios, we can poke out holes in the story where there's weaknesses. But this is the general takeaway. Lines in dialogue are like guns. If you don't load it up with ammunition, then the gun doesn't shoot. If you're a writer, you want your dialogue to shoot and hit its target. Now let's get back to the story, shall we? At this point in the story, Vent is now a fully fledged member of the Guardians, and is given missions to gather more biometal so they can find out what Serpent, the CEO of Slither Inc., is planning with the mysterious biometal Model W. I can skip over almost all of the levels since only a very few of them are actually important. Firstly, I want to talk about 2 rescue missions that somehow don't influence the ending. It's important to a point I make later on at this video's end. There are 2 levels wherein you rescue survivors of Maverick attacks, and they get added to the city area. It bothered me because they took one step to make these levels important and missed the obvious second. So, the city folk that you start out the game with will withdraw from Vent in fear, since he looks like a Maverick apparently. In fact, in the first rescue mission, the Guardians will tell you not to approach people transformed with a biometal. However, in the second rescue mission, you actually save people canonically in biometal armor. This should change things, right? But when these people get added to the city, they give you dialogue like this. The initial city folk still call you a Maverick when transformed into armor late game. Wouldn't it have spread by word of mouth that Vent saved all these people? They already went through the effort of adding the saved people to the city. Why not make it mean something by having them talk about you to the original people there, and then reflect that in changed dialogue? This game gets so close to having good storytelling, and then it baits you out at the very last step. Very disappointing. Maybe Vent's words about saving everyone can have meaning if the populace didn't feel like cardboard cutouts. Instead, kind of feels like this. Let's now talk about the levels that matter to understand the finale. In one mission, we find out there's data which reveals there's a biometal that exerts evil influence on those near it. This is the aforementioned Model W. Then, in the follow-up mission later, we find out that Serpent is the one who went Maverick from that biometal, stole it, and then founded Slither Inc. The important part of this to me is that Serpent actually is being mind-controlled just like our red friend from the start. In fact, his lackeys turn out to be in on this, and really working with the evil Model W. Uh-oh. Before I stop talking about the missions, this intermission stage on the airship gave me a laugh. Vent says he'll stop anyone from getting on the ship. And then he says he'll protect the engine. Not to worry though, he actually does. And that's all I have to say about the game before the conclusion sets in motion. Before I go over the ending, matter of fact, I've been talking a lot, so let's have a tea break so you can form your own thoughts on the story so far. Alright, now time to tackle this thing. Vent finds Serpent has everything he needs to activate the core of Model W, which includes a ton of energy gained from cyber elves. Cyber elves are a sentient source of energy that are made out of civilians that Serpent either kidnaps during one level, or from previous Maverick raids, like a certain one 10 years ago. Serpent was behind all the Maverick outbreaks in this false utopia he's created. Now, he's using the power he gained from it in order to go bigger and take over the entire world. So then, he starts talking about this epic plan of his in the weirdest way possible. I don't know why the writers do this anime BS of codenaming plans. Just say you're taking over the world and leave it at that. So Vent defeats him and saves the world. Now, time for my analysis. This game has themes of fate and also bravery, and these themes somewhat culminate at the ending. I like the idea that the legendary characters from previous series have, in some fragmented form, lived on. and thus fated Vent and Serpent to clash with their powers because the two are supposed to naturally embody the traits of the heroes they are lent power by. I don't think Vent's bravery is properly told in the story though, and now I'll show how Serpent's wickedness is also fraudulent. There's a big elephant in the room that the game never addresses, which is that Serpent is not naturally evil. As discovered before, Serpent is actually under the influence of Model W and acting as a pawn who the Model W lackeys are supervising. Yes, the big cartoonishly evil villain has actually more depth. And what do the writers do with it? They forget about it. When Vent destroys Model W, the brainwashing is still in effect when he dies there, the writers totally forgetting to free him from it. I think that there's two ways to fix Serpent as an antagonist to give this game a good villain. We just need to actually pick whatever's wrong with him and not flip between two ideas. If we go with him being under the mind control of Model W, then that puts Vent in the position of being able to rescue Serpent from its influence. When we destroy Model W, Vent could get Serpent out of there and we could get a glimpse at his real personality. Depending on how responsible he is aware of himself being exactly, we could see Serpent admit himself guilty and give up his position at Slither Inc. to the Guardians and have a true utopia. If instead Serpent is actually evil by nature, we need to delete the ability of Model W to control minds from the story. We could have the red guy at the intro die fighting the Model W lackeys instead, then give Serpent some dialogue that shows what his goal is beyond world domination. What exactly is it he wants the world to change into? We're never told, but he talks about it a lot. And that's all I have to say about the ending. My point about this game's story to you, dear viewer, is as follows. It may be a simple story of good fighting evil, but the writers managed to undermine the good nature of the protagonist as well as the evil nature of the villain. Vent has no real connection to the people of the city, making his desire for power more dubious than heroic. And Serpent is actually potentially a good man, since he joined the Guardians before he was controlled by the evil biometal. Therefore, Megaman ZX fails to tell its simple story. I hope this video helped you to understand storytelling more. Here's some advice that I'd like you to take away from this which you can apply to any story. Look if the dialogue matches whatever the events it's taking place in are. See if the information revealed either supports or contradicts the profile of the writer's characters. Not all information, event, and dialogue mismatches are errors though. Sometimes they can heighten the plot if there's intent behind them. It's up to you to tell the difference. And one last thing. When I talk about hypothetical scenarios, I'm not suggesting them as a real alternative. Anybody can just say, well, what if something else happened instead? It'd be a different story then. Creating a hypothetical on its own is not valid criticism. I'm pointedly using it to highlight the mismatch between the events and the dialogue. And please subscribe if you'd like to support me and see more content like this in the future. I would love to cover interesting games, so recommend any to me in the comments below. Take care now.